Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're cutting right to the core of something really interesting: resource management, experimentation, and maybe knowing when to switch gears from, let's say, low effort to really focused intervention.
Yeah, and we're doing this by looking at some incredibly detailed notes, extracts from Notes on Gardening, Part 687. It sounds niche, but it's all about growing pink stem amaranth with a very specific, low-maintenance approach initially.
Exactly. So our mission here is to pull out the practical stuff, the insights you could actually apply maybe to any project that starts big and, well, a bit risky. We want to see how plants develop under stress. The
Hmm.
cost side that kind of allows for maybe a bit of neglect, and that tipping point where you have to step in and get strategic.
And the starting point is almost, well, paradoxical, isn't it? Quantity versus cost.
Totally. The whole experiment, it seems, hangs on this initial number:
Hmm.
10,000 amaranth seeds, which cost, get this, only 5 Malaysian ringgit.
That 5 ringgit figure is just crucial. I mean, think about it. 10,000 seeds for pocket change. That's the ultimate low-stakes game.
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack this because the author wasn't just trying to grow some amaranth here. It feels more like a behavioral experiment, you know?
How so?
Well, they created a situation where there was almost no emotional or financial investment tied up in these seeds. So they had the freedom, the luxury, really, to treat the whole batch like, as the notes say, wild weeds.
Oh.
And that immediately brings up a question for that first stage. How long can you actually afford to just watch, sacrificing efficiency just to see what happens?
And that sacrifice, it had immediate consequences, right? It was noticeable. The first approach was basically strategic neglect.
Yeah, enabled by that massive seed count and tiny cost.
The author scattered the seeds, let them do their thing with almost zero help, and the source notes this led straight to, quote, overall stunted development.
And that neglect was pretty systematic. We're reading about hardly any fertilizer, only watering occasionally.
Even the ones in pots.
Even the ones lucky enough to be in pots, yeah. The pink stem amaranth really seems to have suffered because, as the author puts it, they were simply planted and forgotten long ago.
So minimal input, minimal output. Pretty straightforward.
Exactly. And in this case, it meant the plants just couldn't reach their full genetic potential.
Okay, but hold on. Isn't that initial failure, or maybe stunted development, isn't that kind of the point in this scenario?
How do you mean?
Well, if you invest almost nothing in materials, almost nothing in labor, failure is incredibly cheap. So isn't that first batch's poor growth just the price you pay to get some basic data on what doesn't work?
That's a really crucial distinction. Yes, the low cost is definitely risk mitigation. You can afford to lose, say, 90% of your seeds just finding out which ones can survive the absolute baseline, the worst conditions.
So the value isn't in the dead seeds.
Not at all. The value is in observing that minimal investment clearly limits the plant's ability to thrive. And that brings up a bigger question, maybe for anyone experimenting on a tight budget. Does intentionally neglecting that first huge batch change how you approach the few that do succeed later on? Does it make you more or less willing to care for them?
That's interesting. And that initial, let's call it baseline data acquisition, it clearly forced a change, a pivot. After seeing all that slow, stunted growth, the gardener didn't just give up.
No, they switched tactics completely. They intervened, but with very targeted resources.
Right, and this is where the notes really shift, isn't it? From just watching to, like you said, dedicated horticulture.
Exactly. The intervention was precise. It mentions providing much-needed fertilization and, importantly, clearing away the surrounding weeds.
Basic plant needs, essentially. Nutrients and space.
The two immediate non-negotiables for any stress plant, yeah. Removing competition and providing food.
And the results were apparently quite dramatic. The source uses the phrase visible growth spurt, happening almost immediately after the intervention.
Astonishingly quick, yeah. It just shows the resilience baked into these plants.
Mm-hmm.
It really proves that even severe neglect early on isn't necessarily a death sentence. The plant has this amazing, almost instant ability to recover once you give it what it was missing.
Okay, but there's a catch, right?
There is, and it's a big one. Recovery is one thing, but homogeneity, uniform growth, that's another challenge entirely. The notes are clear. Even after that growth spurt, development was not yet uniform.
Ah, so that lack of uniformity,
Yes.
that's the clue. It suggests the initial neglect left some kind of lasting difference between the plants, even the survivors.
Precisely. And now the gardener has a new problem, figuring out what's still causing that variance. Why aren't they all catching up at the same rate?
And this is where they shift again. From that broad corrective action, feeding and weeding, to something much more specific, testing.
Exactly. The next logical step, if you want to isolate the real limiting factor now, is what the notes call the evaluation of various microclimates and soil conditions.
So not just different parts of the garden, but subtle differences.
Very subtle. We could be talking slight changes in drainage, maybe a bit more shade from a fence post, tiny temperature variations, even wind patterns. Things you wouldn't notice with the initial scattergun approach.
Because the neglect masked everything else.
Right, so now the gardener has to take the successful few, the survivors, and carefully transplant them into these slightly varied spots. It's the only way to see if specific environmental factors are holding some back.
That whole journey is fascinating. From, chucking 10,000 seeds around almost randomly, to meticulously placing just a few survivors to test these tiny environmental differences.
It really maps out the experimental process. But wait, there's another layer here. To complicate things, or maybe clarify them, the gardener also started a side-by-side comparison.
Ah, yes, the other varieties.
Moving beyond just the effects of past neglect, the author started sowing other amaranth varieties. They had green, red, bicolor, and actually more of the pink ones too.
And what did that show?
Well, this helps isolate the variable of variety itself. Is the pink stem inherently different?
And the key observation, the really critical one here, is that even when the new pink seeds were sown right alongside the others in the same conditions, the pink variety is still noted as generally slow growing.
Definitely slower than the others. The red and green varieties apparently took off much faster, right from day one.
So that strengthens the case, doesn't it? If the new pink batch, the ones that didn't suffer the initial neglect, are still lagging.
Then you have to seriously consider what the source mentions, either other environmental factors that are specific to the pink, or maybe, just maybe, it's a varietal thing, a genetic predisposition to slower growth.
Right, so the author is systematically ticking off the variables. First, they fixed the general lack of nutrients with fertilizer. That helped, but didn't solve everything.
Correct. Now, by comparing it directly with its relatives, they're trying to isolate the inherent growth rate of this pink variety.
Which makes that microclimate testing even more crucial.
Absolutely vital. It's the final step to figure out. Is the slowness just how pink stem amaranth is? Or does it need some very specific niche environmental condition to thrive? Maybe it's something the red and green types don't care about.
It's like watching the scientific method unfold in a garden bed, forced by that initial near failure.
It really is. They used that massive quantity to identify a problem, the slow growth. And now they're using focused, small-scale tests to pinpoint the cause and hopefully find a solution they can apply more broadly later.
And just as we're getting into the nitty-gritty of scientific rigor, the notes give us this lovely little glimpse into the person behind them. They mention future plans, exploring a tricolor variety next. But they add this aside, noting that the foliage pattern, quote, doesn't perfectly match my aesthetic taste.
I love that line too. It's such a great reminder, isn't it? That even when you're meticulously documenting cultivation trials, applying method, often the end goal isn't just pure data. It's personal satisfaction. It's getting a result you like.
True. Aesthetics still play a role.
Definitely. Even in these detailed notes, personal taste clearly becomes a driver for what gets tested next. Curiosity might start the project, but maybe taste helps finalize it.
So, wrapping this up, what does this deep dive into some gardening notes actually mean for you, the listener? What are the takeaways?
Well, I think we've distilled a few key things. First, that low entry cost, that 5 ringgit for 10,000 seeds. It provides incredible experimental freedom. It lets you set up a cheap baseline, even if that baseline is failure.
Okay, freedom through low cost. What else?
Second, intervention works. Specifically the basics, fertilization and weeding. They gave an immediate visible payoff, proving plants can be incredibly resilient and bounce back.
Right, recovery is possible.
And third, when you get uneven results, like that non-uniform growth after the intervention, you have to change your strategy again. You can't just keep blaming past neglect.
You have to dig deeper.
Exactly. You've got to start evaluating the micro variables, the subtle differences in light, drainage, soil to figure out if the problem is genetic, like a slow variety, or if it needs a very specific environment.
What really strikes me is the evolution of the whole project. It starts super casual, almost disposable, because of that tiny investment, 10,000 seeds treated like weeds.
Yeah.
But the second the gardener identifies some winners, some survivors, the whole thing flips.
Mhm.
It becomes this meticulous, almost scientific effort focused on optimizing those few successful plants.
Which brings us perfectly to a final thought for you to maybe mull over. Does making a massive low-cost investment like those 10,000 seeds almost guarantee neglect because failure is so cheap? Or is it the opposite? Does that sheer quantity simply give you the invaluable freedom to sacrifice most of them so you can then afford to pour intense, focused, high-value effort into experimenting on the few that actually succeed?
The initial investment sets the risk.
But it's the later intervention that really dictates the success. Something to think about.
A really provocative thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.